Anger is quite commonly part of the package when men make the transition from blue pill to red pill thinking. We've even coined a term, red pill rage, recognizing it as something unique to men who take the road less traveled in matters of sexual politics. And it makes sense. Red pill mentality puts men at direct odds with the world around them. They see things differently than most other people, different from their peers, different from their families, different from the very society in which they must find a place to fit. If you're red pill, you're a square peg in a world full of round holes. I think there's a wide range of emotions that come with that, and anger would be the least surprising of all of them. In fact, I think there are so many good reasons for rational men to be angry that it is easy to see that anger in a vacuum, as a standalone artifact of the modern war on men. Men are getting screwed, so men are pissed. Seems legit to me. But I do think there's another model that may give a more nuanced understanding of the red pill rage, thus today's talk. I start by referring to the work of Elisabeth Kubler-Ross, who authored the book On Death and Dying. In this book, she drew on her experience with terminally ill people and documented a 5-stage process that they went through as their lives drew to a close. She offered the results of her work as a guide to understanding grief to medical personnel, therapists, clergy, and families. It's a great book to that end, but Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief have also given us a model to examine grief of all kinds in life, not just the loss of life. The stages are simple enough: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And the idea is that for each loss we suffer in life, whether it is our own death, the death of a loved one, or something far less important like losing a job or having a car stolen, we go through the same 5-stage process. We first want to, however briefly, deny the reality of what's happening. As the denial fades, anger sets in. When that doesn't fix the problem, we tend to bargain with people or with a God. When those things fail, the reality of the loss and depression sets in, and the pain of the loss is inescapable. Finally, we accept the loss, and having grieved it, move on past the experience into the next chapter of our lives. I bet you can find something in this to relate to in your own life, looking back on your losses. Now, in my mind, the red pill rage is a very good fit in the grief process. At the very least, it is very consistent with my experience dealing with a lot of men whom the world has simply reduced to the label of angry, which of course means for most people that no other information about them is required. Well, there have been some attempts by academicians and social pundits to explain the red pill rage. They've come up with terms like aggrieved entitlement. That theory, which admittedly touches briefly on the subject of grief, still misses the point. What they think men are grieving is privilege. They believe that the anger they see expressed can't possibly be about children who have been alienated, or homes and property that have been confiscated by the state, or reputations that have been falsely and indelibly stained. No, according to these people, the only thing red pill men are missing is their male and presumably white privilege, the power to lord over the lives of women and children. Some, as we saw with Professor Rebecca Sullivan, actually attribute men's anger to the idea that they aren't allowed to rape. All of this, of course, only explains that the academicians and social pundits are bigots. There's much more about men's anger than ideologues will ever see, and it is not entitlement that men are mourning. It's something else. It's something much bigger, like the loss of reality. We socialize men, often brutally, on every level to live by and believe in fanciful narratives about women and about themselves. We steep men in a sea of lies about justice, fairness, loyalty, and love. Then, one by one, we put most men in circumstances that painfully reveal rampant frauds behind those words. Either most men are slow learners, or the grip of the false narrative is so strong that most can't be shaken from it. The ones who can, red pill men, usually get there after a long series of rude awakenings, sometimes a lifetime of rude awakenings. And when they get there, when they get to a more enlightened, balanced, and accurate view of the sexes, they also find themselves in a world that is coiled up like a rattlesnake, ready to strike at them if they utter a word about their real thoughts or feelings. Not exactly a just reward for daring to face the truth, and it sounds like a recipe for grief to me. It's almost like suddenly finding out that you were adopted at 30, with the world leaning on you to shut up about it. It's also ironic, if my model has any merit, to consider how much society now plays a role in making it harder for red pill men to process grief and move on. Anger, even the anger and grief, is a go-to refuge when wounded people are being attacked, and it can become a great place to hide in a world where no other part of the grief process is deemed socially acceptable. Anger for men is acceptable because it licenses the world to mock and humiliate them. It's an opportunity for women and a lot of men to tell men to man up, to suck it up and take it, and not to be whiny about little things like missing your children or sleeping in your car. The other feelings, though, not so welcome by the world. The grief certainly isn't. Not that the world has to worry about it. True grief is accompanied by vulnerability. It puts a man's heart on a chopping block in full view of the world. Is it any wonder why we see many more men expressing anger than grief? Men won't do it because they're not crazy. They know better than to be vulnerable to the world. The world is wired to keep men stuck in anger rather than enable them to complete the grieving process. And I think this forms a crossroads for most red pill men. Living this stuff, carrying these ideas around in your head, can be highly isolating. It puts us in a position to buy social acceptance with our silence about who we are and what we believe. I think that most men, being the resilient and adaptive creatures that they are, will get through the process anyway. But I do think that society's over-the-top hostile reaction to the MRM and MGTOW forcing the process underground presents an impediment to men to overcome, and one more loss to grieve about the world they thought they lived in. You see, having lived through most of the so-called sexual revolution has given me a long-term view of matters between men and women. I've spent years documenting and speaking out against some of the most rage-inducing aspects of men's lives. I talk a lot about the destruction and the harm of feminism and other forms of chivalry. I have made pointing at the naked emperor a life's passion. But in doing that with unrelenting purpose, I am probably guilty of the same reduction of men to their anger as the rest of the world. Because when I peek at things from above my own anger, what I see most in the world of men is loss, and a staggering amount of it. It was never all roses between the sexes, but as I look out across this fatherless culture, all I can see is a society in decay. Single mothers are legion, breeding generations of dependency and criminality. Boys are being psychologically castrated from the moment they're born, which in America is also from the moment they are sexually mutilated. Fathers are default stooges in the media, in family courts, and in the rest of the real world. And of course, the world demonizes people who talk about any of this. That isn't just maddening or rage-inspiring. It is the core of our long-standing social stability rotting, crumbling, and beginning to vanish. It's a loss on a monumental scale. And the things we are losing don't look to be coming back anytime soon, regardless of how much we may want to bargain. Most of the time I do talks dealing with cringe-worthy things that have the tendency to inspire anger. And after all, men do need forums where their anger isn't a taboo. That's the whole point of it. But here and there I get reminders of the bigger picture. It's sure as hell something to consider when you look out across the burned-out landscape where useful cooperation between women and men used to be, where the souls of children go to die. Does that make me angry? You better believe it does. But sometimes grief is a better response than just outrage. Anger helps prepare for conflict and to survive it, but grief and the acceptance that comes with it changes perception. That changes expectations, which can help most men move on from a world that no longer exists. Is any of this earth-shattering stuff for the average red pill male? Hardly. But it can be useful to consider red pill grief versus red pill rage, even as you forge through your own trail in a blue pill world. And that is it for another talk from An Ear for Men. As always, thanks for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed. We'll see you next time.